Time to talk about survey research. Okay, let's talk about what the definition and the purpose is of survey research. Okay, survey research is an instrument to collect data that describes one or more characteristics, beliefs, attitude, behaviors, demographics, essentially constructs. We're trying to really understand constructs. The purpose is to collect data. There's many ways to collect it, digitally, in person, and through mail. To test hypotheses or research questions about people's opinions or about topics or issues in education, particularly for educational research. So there's two types of designs. The first design is a cross-sectional design. And this survey really looks at individuals over time, a snapshot in time. It's a one-time thing. You're not gonna be doing it again. The advantages is you can get data quickly. Nowadays with the technology, particularly, I do a lot of Qualtrics surveys, and then I make sure that people are able to take them on their phone. That's the easiest and fastest way to be able to gather data through a survey now, for me anyway. Disadvantages is not effective if you need to understand trends over time, particularly for the longitudinal studies, which we're going to be talking about in design 2. And so since design 1 has disadvantages, those disadvantages are made up in design 2. Design 2, those are called sort of longitudinal studies, and this is collecting, you need at least 2 periods in time in order to be considered officially a longitudinal study. Okay, you have these trend surveys where you're studying change of beliefs, behaviors, essentially constructs of one particular population over two points in time. It could be at the beginning of the semester and at the end of the semester if you're studying, for example, here my example, are 7th grade struggling readers. You have cohort surveys. These are surveys that you have a particular population in different random points in time. And so the example here is, again, sticking with the 7th grade struggling readers. You know that there's 250 in your school. You're going to sample 50 of them in September, 50 of them again in January, and 50 in May. And they all, if you're doing random assignment, they all have the same opportunity to be selected, even maybe more than once in these 3 different points in time, or not, or they may be different, but more than likely you're going to have some crossover, but that's okay because random assignment studies are true experimental studies, and those have a higher degree of credibility, not credibility, a higher degree of scientific prowess, I guess, behind them. Panel survey. This is where you have individuals over time. Again, sticking with this same example, you know, these 25 students that you select that are struggling readers. You survey them in 09, and you wait all the way until 15 to find out over those. You know, all the way into college, how they dealt with reading and how they overcame or did not overcome reading, whether some of them you know, graduated, some of them didn't. And then you have the follow-up surveys, and these are sort of you know, looking at one population over time. So again, looking at the 7th graders, you survey them in 2003, and you do a follow-up survey again in 2009. Okay. All right. So the advantages of longitudinal is that obviously when you have different points in time, you have more data, and you can actually be able to analyze growth and, you know, change in your participants in the same group of participants. And the disadvantages obviously is that it's really hard to keep track of them over time. You know, if you have 7th graders in, say, Madera Unified or Madera High School, you know, by the time they're in 7th grade, you try to interview them for graduation. A lot of them doesn't mean that they dropped out. A lot of them could have dropped out. A lot of them could have changed to a different district. For whatever reason, it's really hard to, you know, the longer time that passes, the longer it is to be able to follow your participants. How do you collect survey data? Questionnaires, obviously, we've talked about those. That's the most common type, particularly digital. I use a lot of digital, particularly through Qualtrics, which is my tool of choice, but also hard copy. Sometimes, if you're going to be, I'm doing right now a project in the community. Unless that I'm assuming everybody has cell phones, so I can do, a Qualtrics survey where they can take it through cell phones, but a lot of them don't. A lot of kids, they're not going to have cell phones, and so I need to have hard copies. And then through the phone. These are obviously not recommended, but nevertheless they are done if you're doing a national study. And no one, and the survey maybe has some open-ended questions involved, or for whatever reason you want to do interviews. That's, again, that costs a lot of money and it's time consuming, but it is an avenue. Okay, so how do you construct the questionnaire study? You obviously state the problem first. You construct the questionnaire, right? You have structured questions and you have unstructured questions. So these are closed-ended, right? These are closed-ended questions, and these are open-ended. Okay, and then you test pilot the questionnaire. You provide it to some colleagues or some peers so that they can go through it and see if there's any issues with it, and then you prepare a cover letter. So let's talk about all of these different components here. Okay, the first one is constructing the questionnaire. What things to do: make sure it's attractive, brief, easy to respond to, and you incentivize people's times. Are you providing them a gift certificate, or are you entering them into a raffle to win an iPad or something like that? Those type of things will increase your response rate. Things not to do: sloppy, crowded, misspelling, too wordy, too lengthy, too many open-ended questions. Typical types of questions: Likert scale, rank order, checklist, free response, which is really sort of like essay, and then true and false and multiple choice. A lot of the quizzes that you're going to be taking for this class are going to be multiple choice, true, false, and free response are the three main ones that, for all your quizzes that I use essentially. I think that's mostly what I've been using. Okay. Constructing the survey: make sure the questionnaire is attractive and brief. Know the information that you need and why. Include items related to the objective of the study. Collect demographics. You want to know who took the study. You want to make sure that you're targeting the right people. Focus on a single problem. Define ambiguous terms, constructs. I tried to use earlier in a survey the term that was political involvement. Well, what is that? Social involvement. What is that? Our participants were too young to understand those terms, so I had to not only put the term but also put the definition right next to it. And word the questions clearly. Avoid leading questions such as, is it true that you don't know how to read, or is it true that you're a great reader? Obviously you're leading them into answering a certain way. Avoid controversial and embarrassing questions such as, do you have tattoos in private parts? I don't think it's something you want to ask, or even if they can't see you, that may be too controversial or embarrassing and they may not want to take your survey. If it's open-ended, make sure that you leave enough sufficient room for responses. And nowadays the softwares where you put in these open-ended questions, you can actually stipulate like word limit, how many words they can respond to, and things like that. So pilot test the questionnaire. Make sure to send it out to some friends, peers. Let them tell you if there's problems. Make sure that they give you honest feedback and consider it and revise it and send it back and revise it and finalize it. Cover letter. Okay, you make sure that one has to be sent with every questionnaire. You can't just send the questionnaire. Got to have a cover letter. Explain what is being asked of them to do and make sure that it's brief. Hopefully, probably no more than one page for most cover letters. Things to remember: explain the purpose of the study, the significance and importance of the study. Give them a good reason to cooperate, right? Like incentivize, right? Gift certificate, entering into a drawing. Make sure you share with your participants the results. Okay. Include the mailing address, phone number, and email of who you are so that they can reach you in case they have any questions. And make sure to test pilot the cover as well by sending it to colleagues and peers. Administering it. You should either are going to administer it through sort of a random sample, simple random. Remember, that's true experimental, as we talked about. And then a stratified random could also be true experimental, actually. Anytime you see random assignment, a lot of the times we're talking about true experimental, okay? Or you can have cluster, systematic, non-random samples, as we say. These are quasi-experimental. Distribution of the questionnaire. Now, this here are just a table here. I'm not going to go over it, but it tells you the type of survey, right? Is it, an in-person survey, over the phone, through the mail? Mall intercept, that's convenient sampling through the mail, and computer assisted is like SurveyMonkey, Qualtrics. This is my most common one, actually. I do most everything computer assisted. And then how difficult it is to obtain a sample. For me, it would be very easy. What is the cooperation? Usually pretty high, I hope. Sometimes, not for me. Cost per respondent, pretty low. I don't have to spend any money. What are the advantages? Automatic data entry. Actually, Qualtrics does all the analysis for me. All I need to do is pull down the reports and the tables. Disadvantages is it requires computer literacy, which I have, but maybe somebody doesn't. Okay. And distribute your questionnaire, again, through mail, email, telephone, personal administration personally, or through interview. So all of these are avenues, and these are all advantages and disadvantages of distributing it through these means. Okay. Following up, make sure if you have a low response rate that you follow up, that you send another email or another letter, send a second questionnaire. Usually in the first sort of time that you send a letter, you may get a 30 to 50% response rate, and a second letter may increase that up to 20%. Analyzing the results, make sure that you include the sample size, the percent of the returns, and the response rate for each item. And the response rate for each item is important because some participants may answer some questions but not others, and therefore you're going to have a higher response rate for some questions and a lower for others. So when you're presenting the results of that particular question, it's important to have the response rate for that particular question. Make sure they've all been entered accurately, and make sure that that you have many percentages based on the responses. Make sure that you fully understand the results before you present them. New technology, as I said, SurveyMonkey and Zoomerang, but also Qualtrics is my tool of choice at Fresno State. Faculty get a full license. I'm not sure if students do. I'll have to double check on that, but I think they might. Anyway, thank you very much, and I will do a little bit of, in the next video, a little bit of a sample of a Qualtrics survey.